right, good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good.
Well, if you don't know me, I'm Robert Holsey. I am a product manager here at Claris. I've been with the company for almost 20 years. I've touched almost all the products, and these days I am focused on Claris Studio and Claris Connect. Got a short agenda, but there's actually quite a bit that I want to cover this morning. We'll go through sort of the what and why Studio exists in the platform. Go through that pretty quickly. I want to go into a real-world type of example, building off of what you saw in the keynote, and then give you some real practical how-to examples. I will be talking about some of the stuff that's to be coming, but I really want to focus that how-to in giving you tangible things that you can go home and start exploring with Studio later today. And then, time permitted, which I hope to have, we'll have some time for Q&A. All right, so let's jump into the what and why. You've probably seen this from us quite a bit, the T-shaped diagram. This is how we see your world, your data at the center. FileMaker obviously is primarily targeted on the internal app solutions, understanding that, yes, it stretches a bit into the external-facing solutions through things like custom web publishing and, of course, into automation with our scripting language. But it's sort of core to the internal-facing apps. And then the integrations and automations, that's where Connect lives, really down at the bottom. And then our Studio world is really focused on those external-facing solutions, where we have seen gaps in either hard technical limitations on what you can do with FileMaker or the complexities and the skills and resources required to reach that. And that's where Studio is meant to solve those gaps. Three main areas you'll hear us talk about. The first is the data collection forms. This is what we released first a couple of years ago. You may have tried it early on, stepped away from it. We've been doing continual improvements to it. Some of what you'll see in the demo here, I will imagine not all of you have seen yet, so there's been advancements in this area. And then cases where you want to go beyond your internal team but still within your company. So a lot of times you have within an organization a group of licensed FileMaker users. They're in FileMaker every day, but then you need to express some data to an external person like an executive. So you may have a dashboard here. All the data started in FileMaker, your users are using FileMaker, but then to see sort of the health of the company, you want to share a dashboard. Another example we'll see sometimes is like going back to the maintenance use case where you've got a bunch of workers with iPads and they're working out in the field using FileMaker, but then you have a project manager. You may want them to be living in something like a Kanban board in Studio so they can just sort of navigate traffic, make sure people are assigned the right tasks. So that's what we talk about when we talk about sort of outside of the core team. But last but not least, in the area that we've honestly been getting the most excitement and most interest in is the idea of a custom web portal. So this is the idea of taking data that you had living in your FileMaker solution and then exposing it to external customers and being able to create a custom interface on top of that and do the whole thing securely. This is where we'll spend a bit of time in this presentation, but I also, like I said, want to get you into some of the more advancements we've made on the public-facing forums. I want to touch a little bit on why Studio, though, as opposed to WebDirect. I get that question quite a bit of why didn't we just make WebDirect work for more users? The thing to understand is Studio was built from the ground up with the intention to be able to scale and reach way more users than you would be able to with FileMaker. The FileMaker architecture was built for teams. We've done quite a bit with WebDirect. We've got it up to 1,000 users, but you all know that takes running multiple machines to get it there. It's really built for a client-server relationship. It's not architecturally meant to do the scale. If we were to try to get WebDirect to do that, we would be making it not WebDirect. And so instead of doing that, we've focused on a brand new tech stack that is Studio. By virtue of that, that's also allowed us to make sure that our licensing model will better fit with that structure. I'm not going to get too much into the details here, but I do want you to understand that we see the external customers, the folks that, they may hit that site a whole bunch of times over the course of a week and then not come back to it for months. Or maybe you've got a semester starting and you've got a ton of students hitting that thousands of times a day for 2 weeks, and then the semester starts and they're not coming back. So we won't get into the specifics of this, but we will be listing that type of connection differently than your typical team member so that we can actually separate that and not have you have to worry about, I'm going to have at max 1,000 people connected, so therefore I need 1,000 users like you would, again, if it was something like WebDirect. The last point here is that we wanted to make sure that we're continuing to keep the spirit of what you all love about FileMaker, what I love about FileMaker, which is that I can iterate very quickly when a customer's requirements change. You've all done that conversation with the customer, and then you're back at your hotel room and you're making those changes real quick in FileMaker. Like, we wanted to maintain that same kind of development process in Studio. So while it's not a one-to-one copying over the calculations you could do in FileMaker as an example, it's the spirit of being able to quickly iterate. And hopefully you see that as you get more involved, especially with our custom views. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about what's possible, and we're going to walk through a quick demo of a solution that we put together. Here we've got a data collection form. For those that were at the keynote, this is the collection form that's getting those job requests in. We've already filled out this first part. What I want to highlight are some of the more advanced capabilities. So we've got a category listing here, so different types of maintenance that we could do. And you'll notice that depending on the category, the type is dynamic and actually changes. So we've got custom value list built into this. And then this category also drives things like a permit required field appears only when a construction category is selected. And then taking that one step further, depending on the category, we actually show a different page to collect a different information. The idea here is that we want to make sure that depending on the type of job we're doing, we're getting very specific information back into the hands of the workers. So let's go ahead and fill this out. We'll do a plumbing emergency pipe break and fill the rest of this out. Here are the custom fields specific to plumbing. And then when we hit submit here, another thing that we've done is put in a preview page. So we're actually grabbing the information that the customer submitted so that they can confirm it before they actually hit submit and send that data back into FileMaker. Real quick, show of hands. Was there anything new that you didn't know FileMaker or Studio could do here that you just saw? Okay.
Maybe the custom value lists.
The custom value lists?
Yeah, but I haven't played with it a lot yet, so maybe.
Okay, cool. We'll come back to the hows and how we did that, but it's good to understand sort of the functionality that we're putting into market, and then that's only as good as us actually telling you about it and making sure that you have the information around it. So great. One thing I'll call out now, just so I don't forget, everything that you're about to see, we're actually creating engineering blogs. So we'll go in depth on how we did all of these things. I'll show it, but if it goes by too fast, if there's pieces missing, understand that in the coming weeks we're going to be rolling out blogs that go directly into how to do these things. One other thing I wanted to call out about this category type, we're basing these types based off of a table, which means that I can actually have that table in FileMaker, and then we can actually add to it. So I'm coming in here and adding a new electrical item for getting into the electric fence business. When I commit this record change and come back into Studio, in this case I'm reloading the page, but really if at any point a new customer comes in and takes a look at this, we'll see now our custom value list has those new options. So here's an example of being able to integrate FileMaker and Studio a little bit more tightly. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here just showing that, okay, that data, that record that we just created actually has come into our FileMaker solution. This is the solution that's in the hands of the workers. They can go in here and start filling out information, like putting together a quick cost estimate. Once that's created, though, the customer then comes in and logs into, in this case, again, we're logging in through Cognito through AWS. So we've got a custom login page, and when they come in, they will see now that new record that we just created. So first record is the one you saw in the keynote. Second one is the one that we just created here. When that record was created, we were using our data sources functionality that we showed in the keynote to actually take that data and automatically push it between the clients. So now as we update the record here in just a moment, we'll see that pop in on the FileMaker side as well, which feels a lot longer when you're in front of an audience. But there you see our data has come in. So all that is handled for you automatically with our data sources capability. Cool. Let's get into how we've done some of this stuff. So when you're building a Studio solution, one of the first things you're going to need to decide is how you handle the data. And there's actually a few different approaches that we've got built in. The first is the shadow table approach. This is what we actually launched when we first introduced Studio. This was the first way to get Studio and FileMaker talking to each other. The thinking here was that everyone's familiar with FileMaker. The thing that you are most comfortable with is managing tables in the relationship graph. So it felt like a pretty natural entry point for us. It also means Studio is the source of truth, meaning you're actually reaching directly into the Studio tables. But I want to be cards on the table, completely honest. We understand that there's some performance challenges here. We've got a brand new tech stack that is trying to talk to FileMaker. There's just differences in the way that the data is stored. There's a lot of FileMakerisms that create some overhead for us. That's all to say that we're not giving up on it. There's things that we've been making improvements on since we've released this. As an example, originally you had a limitation of being a full access account to actually edit the data on the Studio side. We've since fixed that so it respects data entry accounts to be able to go in and actually make changes to the Studio data as well. And we're actually rewriting the communication between FileMaker and Studio, and that's nearing completion. And that'll allow us to do batch requests for records. So it will make the connection, bringing large record sets from Studio into FileMaker much faster. But I don't ever want to set an expectation that this is going to be as fast as a native FileMaker table. And so therefore, I think there's scenarios like the one you just saw where I was updating the services where a direct connection like this may make sense. But honestly, I don't do things like where I've got a FileMaker table and I'm linking directly to a Studio table and then showing that information in a portal. You're going to take a hit as FileMaker is going and requesting that information from the Studio host. The second approach is the ability to exchange data between FileMaker and Studio through Connect. I'm sure you all went to Louis and Bridget's session yesterday. Louis talked quite a bit about the advancements we've been making there. Since the initial release, we've added a number of Studio triggers and actions. We've made a lot of improvements to the FileMaker connections and triggers as well, which obviously helps us here, but then across any integration that you're using with FileMaker. We've also made some changes to how licensing works. I know Bridget mentioned it in the keynote. I think she mentioned it yesterday as well. We've changed our licensing, so any communication between Studio and FileMaker is now free. It doesn't count towards the number of active flows. And we're going to continue streamlining this approach as we build this out. We see Connect as being super important for giving you complete control over how you handle your data and move it back and forth. And then the most recent approach is what we showed off at the keynote yesterday. Louis also talked about it a little bit, even going so far as using updated UI that even I didn't have. He said that's one of the perks of being an engineer, so I love that. But that was a direct data source of FileMaker within Studio. So what you'll be able to do there is for your apps, for the tables that you want, to be able to specify the ones that you want to have access to in Studio. We'll do this in iterations, and I'll talk a little bit more about sort of this first version of it. But the goal here is to make it so that in 80% of the time when you're setting something up, you don't have to think about data. You don't have to go through managing what you would do through Connect. That this is just a data source that you plug into, and we're replicating the data. Go for it, Oliver.
Are there plans for other types of external data sources like SQL or?
So the question was, is there plans for other data sources, something like SQL, or I could imagine lots of other sources? The answer is yes. The reason that we're calling it data sources and not specifically FileMaker data sources is leading in that direction. As I called out yesterday, was there another question? Oh, I'm sorry, go for it.
So this would bypass Connect? You would be able to set up data sources in Studio without having to do the connecting first?
Right, so the question was, does this bypass Connect and allow you to do that data connection without having to go through Connect? The answer is yes. If you went to Louis' session yesterday, he also talks, though, about ways that we're providing hooks to what we're doing here into Connect. So little foreshadowing here, but I was going to speak to the idea that this gives you sort of the up the middle. Most cases you just need to access your data, but then you want to layer on additional processing or additional integrations with Connect. We'll give you all the hooks to do that. And then the thing that I really want to make sure that everyone is understanding is that we are actually replicating the data between FileMaker and Studio. And I know all of the questions that raises around how we're going to handle syncing and making sure that data is up to date. Our goal here, again, is to make this so that you don't have to think about that. Okay, let me move on to a couple of key elements, just continuing this. I boiled this down to three things that I really want you to walk away with as far as this first release. One is that there's data consistency. When a record is updated in FileMaker, we will update that record on the Studio side or add that record, and the same thing go in the other direction. If you've used the shadow table approach in the past, you'll notice that while you are reaching directly into Studio, if you were showing those records on a layout and a new record came in on the Studio side, you actually had to do a refresh window before that would pop in. We're building this so that there is client notifications on each side, meaning that when a record updates on the FileMaker side, if I've got that Studio page open, that record pops in, and likewise go in the other direction. So again, the less that we can make you think about managing your data, the better for us here.
Next month?
Not quite, but it's coming soon. I'm glad that you're eager, though. It's worth schema changes. This is something that's also really important to us. Studio and FileMaker, there are primitives that overlap, text fields, number fields, things of that nature. But Studio has quite a bit more as far as sort of richer text or richer field types, like the comment field comes to mind. Where it's a field, it actually stores lots of different comments inside of that field. There's rating fields in Studio, phone number fields that automatically handle the mapping. So we're going to be doing things to then map Studio between those types of field types and what you have in FileMaker. As I showed you in that demo just earlier, what you saw in the keynote yesterday, as I make schema changes in the case that I showed here being Studio, we will map that, create that schema on the FileMaker side that best maps to the particular type of field that you created. I do expect this to happen in iterations as well, especially on the FileMaker side. We have got so many deep functionality as far as how the validation pieces work and auto-enter calculations and all that. So we'll start with sort of the primitive field type and then start figuring out where we need to go deeper as we learn from all the use cases you guys build. And then the last point is this is all built on OData. I think Clay talked a little bit about this in his sessions. We're doing this for, excuse me, for Studio and Studio and FileMaker, but the advancements we're making in OData is really going to help us across the board with integrations. When Wes explained it to me like I was 5, the main takeaway for this was that this gives us a much more direct access to the data from Studio and FileMaker comparative to other approaches that we could take through something like the Data API, which is what Connect uses. So it'll be much more efficient and scalable for the server. Probably asking, do we really need 3 ways of doing this, which is a totally fair question. One that I honestly think about quite a bit. Specifically, there's a line between giving you the tools and flexibility and when that becomes sort of a place where now you're spending a whole bunch of time thinking about, did I make the right choice? If I make the wrong choice, what is that going to cost me? For now, we are keeping all 3 in that for simple things like I was showing you of updating the services, the shadow table approach feels quick and easy. For sure, I don't see Connect's capabilities going away. How they become closer related to the data sources is to be determined. And again, you saw some things from Louis yesterday about the hooks that we're building into this. But it feels very important to us that you guys have this level of control. We'll get into some examples here, but pre-processing of data where it's not a direct one-to-one of what you captured or representing in the FileMaker side. So this feels really important to us. And then the data sources, this is really meant to be the, hey, I'm just getting started. I need to stand something on top of my FileMaker data. Easiest way to go about it. So for the moment, yes, we think that the 3 are important. I absolutely see a future, though, where we start condensing these, and again, where we can make you think less about how you're managing your data and less about making decisions and more about just solving the problem in front of you. That's the direction that we're heading. I want to talk a bit more about sort of just the core components that you've got at your disposal as you build the kind of solution that you just saw. Custom view is a big one. Custom view is something that we've been working on for quite a bit. You saw from Eurus some of the advanced stuff that is being done. Marcelo yesterday also had a great session on a solution that we're building, or Reliant is building for a customer using custom views. There's a lot of capabilities here. Our first version of this we'll be releasing in the coming weeks. And we've got lots of things that we're going to iterate and improve on that are in our current external testing program that I encourage you all to join. But there's three key elements that I want you to understand. The first is the way that data binding works in Studio today. So you're familiar with FileMaker. Every layout it has a context of a single table occurrence. I won't say that it's easy to understand because that is like when you first are starting, it's a little bit of a thing to understand. But once you do, it clicks and it's very one-to-one. Studio doesn't have that same limitation as far as per view. So you can actually have on a view multiple, what we refer to as data controls that are driving records and then have them all in one view. This is another example. Iris and I have had lots of conversations about the line between giving you lots of flexibility and customization and where you have to start making some decisions. But we'll go into the specifics of how this works in a moment, but understanding that Studio is different in the way that it handles context than FileMaker is really important getting started. Won't spend a ton of time here on objects, but these are your building blocks. So these are the field types. These are data controls like a status toolbar, a list control, spreadsheet, and then data visualization, summaries, charts. These are all the things that make up your custom view. And then functions, which is really what drives the user interaction, starts getting your business logic built in. And we're not as function rich as FileMaker is, but there's some really powerful functions here that I think are worth drilling into a little bit more detail, again, to give you a sort of baseline understanding of when you jump into Studio and are building things. The first big difference that you're going to notice is that we're using dot notation in calculation or functions versus in FileMaker's, FileMaker's function language. We chose this because this is really the standard today. In most languages that you're going to interact with, using dot notation is standard. For me personally, who's been working with FileMaker for a long time, it did take me a little bit when I was first introduced to this, actually doing some programming in other languages. But once you understand that you're basically for an object drilling down into its properties, it actually becomes really easy to understand even what can I get from this object as opposed to hunting around for it. It's important to understand that similar to FileMaker, we can actually reach at data, or reach, at data, from two different levels. So you've got the table level. So in this example, we're reaching the services table, the field called service category, and then getting its value, versus the the views object. So here we've got the job request view, an object called category, and then its value. And we'll see in the examples here why that's important. Sometimes you need to reach into the data, into the actual data table, and compare that to a value that you have captured at the view level. And then just a handy tip here, we have these shortcuts, this.table or this.view, that you can use, and you'll see me using it here to quickly get to a specific table or view. So instead of me having to type in service table or remember or just want to be very quick here, I can just type this.table, and then much like OMW on iOS will switch to on my way, we switch you to the appropriate table or view. So real quick example here, we want to return the ID for a currently selected record within a card list. And what I'm doing here is getting the view called client portal subview, the object, which is a card list called list, the selected row, so what the user has actually clicked on, and then getting its record ID. And in this case, it gave me 365.
Question.
Yeah, here's go
What's
for it.
that raw value versus value thing going on? Referring to a table?
So the question was, what is the difference between the raw value and value? In this particular case, and the one that I was just showing, can I go back to that easily? You probably would have gotten the same result. I can't go back, okay. But there are certain cases where, like when you're getting values from the, like a drop-down,
Yeah, exactly.
in that case, the raw value, I'm probably going to flip this. I believe the answer is that the raw value gives you the UUID for the value drop-down, and then the value is the sort of user-friendly value that the end user would see. And so there are certain cases where you actually want to you want to make sure you're talking to the right thing, and so the raw value being the actual UUID would be the thing that you would want to use.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so the other big part of this obviously is functions. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not as function rich as what we've got on the FileMaker side yet. And we're continuing to add to this as we run into needs, but there's actually quite a bit of functions already in the list. I will call out, I don't have a screenshot of it. Some of the folks that are in our external testing program can vouch for this though. We're making some really great enhancements to the way that functions, like the function dialog looks, makes it feel much more like FileMaker, where you can actually see the list of functions, have an inline view of what those functions do. So that will be coming in the near term. But I want to drill into a couple of these functions. Ones that took me a little while to get my head around, and once I did, it opened up some really interesting possibilities. The first is this filter function. It takes two parameters, a table or an array, and then a condition. And so what this is doing is returning a data subset based on a condition that you provide. I want to call out, if you haven't seen it, this is actually a screenshot from the product where as you are creating or writing functions, we show this up in line. And what I really like about this, which I can take no credit for, it was one of the engineers, that as I'm filling in one of the parameters, the green bar, the highlight, will actually switch. So I always have in-context understanding of, oh, this is what I'm filling out. And it gives you some examples, which we're also fleshing out to make those more clear. One thing, so I don't forget to mention it, you'll start seeing from us a lot more in Studio is, well, besides just more documentation, is in that documentation comparing how it works in FileMaker. So here's how you may have done it in FileMaker, here's the equivalent in Studio. So hopefully that helps bridge the gap for us there. In this example though, I want to get the contents of a record based on a value. So I'm using the filter function. I'm then pointing, remember it takes an array or a table. In this case I'm pointing at a table, which is that jobs table that we brought in. And then I'm using another special shortcut here called this item. In this context, it's telling me I want for the table. I could have typed the whole table out, but this gives me a direct link to the table's properties. And I'm saying for the table's client email, when that equals a hard-coded value of my email address, it then returns a JSON array of that record. That JSON array you could then go and do lots of different things with. What I want to do next, though, is go and get a specific column out of that. So I'm going to use the index function. So this takes in an array. You provided a row and then a column name, and it'll return a result. So in this example, again, we want to get the value of a specific records field. So now I'm combining these two things. I'm doing an index. The array that I'm passing in is the results of that filter, and I want to get the first row because I know I'm only going to have one returned, and then the client name, which is the name of the email, or sorry, the field, which returns my name.
So the index is actually 10 base, or I can remember, like its first is 1 as opposed to 0.
So the question is specific to the 1 in that right before the client name.
Yeah.
So the question is really about what that 1 represents. That is, oh, I see what you're saying. Whether it starts at 0 or 1. In this case, it starts at 1, and because I'm only getting one result back, and it gives me
Gotcha.
my name in this case.
What is the $sign operator?
A unfortunate result of just the automatic naming of the table that we brought in. It actually means nothing in this case. It's the current builds that we have for where we're mirroring the question for folks was, what is the dollar operator in this case? And it's actually not an operator. It's just the way that the auto mirroring of the tables right now, our naming convention for our test builds, this won't be released, is adding mirror $sign and then the name of the table name. Cool. All right, so those are sort of the core elements of setting up custom views and functions. Now I want to talk a little bit about access. And there's 3 components here. The first is external identity provider. This is actually in market today. If you go in, you've got Studio Access and you sign in, you'll see the ability to set this up, as well as the ability to create groups, which is something else we just introduced. I think by the end of next week, all our documentation should be up for this as well. So you can start using this immediately. One thing I do want to call out and recognize, though, is in Studio, we're supporting OIDC and SAML, which I know does not line up with what we're supporting elsewhere in the platform. Cloud and server all have different levels of support of things. We recognize that. We know that that's a pain. couple of years ago, I think it was not last year, the year before, Peter Nelson talked about some of our guiding North Stars. We've knocked a bunch of them down. Right now, one of those North Stars being data everywhere, which is why you're seeing the investment we're seeing in data. That remaining star is unified ID, having one place to manage all of your accounts, being consistent in how we handle external. Just again, cards on the table, it's a big lift for us to consolidate all those things and do it in a way that doesn't break anything that's already out there. And instead of waiting till all of that is done before supporting this on the studio side, which we believe is key for doing things like bringing external customers in and getting them access, we wanted to first introduce the capability. And actually, I forgot to mention that on the calculation side, that index and filter, I totally recognize again that that's more complex than what you're seeing on the FileMaker side. And the approach that we're taking here is let's first get the functionality, let's first make sure that people are to build things that are meaningful, like what you saw from Marcelo yesterday, and then we can start layering on top of it what we've done in FileMaker for years, which is the sort of abstraction layer and making that easier. So I could see, for example, in that function I just showed, a future where it's just get record and you're passing in a couple parameters. But we're starting with making sure that the core functionality is there, people can start building stuff, and then we'll simplify. Access control, what this is really about is making it as simple as possible for you to constrain what folks have access to. Right now, we've got two role types, team manager and manager. Team manager basically has access to everything, and then for members, rather, when you add them to a hub, just by virtue of doing that, they are then limited to both the views that are in that hub and the data that's constrained inside of it. Earlier on, we had effectively a filter at the client level, meaning that we would send the information to the client. It would filter what they should have access to and only show them that. We're making changes now that will be up again in the next week or two that constrains it so that the back end only sends to that client the records that are within that specific hub. And then the last piece here is continuing to sort of stand on top of that. So that is the first level of constraint, but then you may want to constrain at the record level. And so we saw earlier in the demo video here that when we logged in as a particular user, it filtered just to those two records that person was assigned to. None of that was at the front end. I didn't go in and create a filter for the list control. That was literally done at the back end level, meaning that when the person signed in, we do a check against their email address and just show or just send those records to the client. We'll see an example of that in just a moment. We're also
So is that, and there's no way around that, because obviously segmentation of data, if you've got multiple clients logging into the same interface where everything's in the same table, that's essentially the data's never even getting to them. If you set that up to basically limit them access to
yeah, so the question, if I'm following it, is there any way for the client to work around this? Yes. No. What is happening here is when you specify that I want this value in a field to match the email address, that client is only ever receiving the 1, 10, 100 records that are assigned to that person. One thing to call out that we're working on as an expansion of this. So this functionality, again, will be coming in the coming weeks. The next stage to this, though, is how related data works. So this is at a per table layer, meaning that you have to have a field in that table that has the user's name as an example. The next step for this would be able to say, okay, this is the table that I've constrained. It has these related records in these other tables. Cascade that level of access. I thought I saw another hand go up. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't used Studio much, so this could be a bad question. But the email you keep talking about, there's an email we're talking about an email that's a field in the client record, I assume,
Yes.
somewhere in the database, and that email is also mirroring to the authentication, the email used in authentication.
Yes.
So all that has to stay the same. Somebody uses an alias email or something. They're not going to be able to log in. They're not going to be able to authenticate without the email that's used.
So the question is around is it matching a value in a field to the email address of the person that's logged in? The first answer to that is yes, and you'll see that in a minute. But if you're looking at doing things like you said aliases. The other option that we're giving you is a account ID, so it doesn't have to be on the actual email address. And then that would be a number field that you store in your columns, or in your data, and you can match on that instead.
This is just your demo using the email.
In this case, in the email. One other thing I'll call out is this is our first iteration. This feels like the most required for the type of use case of having someone sign in and accessing it, but I could see in a future where we give you other things that you could base that conditional access to. Good segue though, because we're going to get into some of the how-tos. I want to first talk, so the first handful of these are really about things that are in market today, again, so that you can start going home and playing with this stuff and using it right away. And then I'll talk a bit about custom view, some things that are coming in custom view and the access control, because those things are going to be coming again in the coming weeks. Okay, so the conditional value list. The way that this worked is we're pointing this at a table that exists as a separate table inside of Studio. So we can actually come over here and see the table, and very simple number, you've got service category, job type. The second piece of magic, and this is something that we just introduced in production, is the ability to filter based on calculation. So what we're doing here is saying when the service table's service category value equals the job request, so the job request is the view, the value of the category object. When those two things match, which is this here, when the value of what they chose matches a record coming from this table, only then does it show the appropriate record data. So hopefully straightforward, but maybe not immediately obvious in the way that it's currently set up or lack of documentation. And again, this is one example of something that we'll have a blog on that'll go into much more detail. This one is also super easy. You've probably pieced it together already, but I've just got a layout that's based off of the services table that's coming from Studio. So if I go into Manage Database, you can see here, it's not even related to anything. It's just a table hanging out. This is a shadow table pointed directly at Studio. I won't spend a whole lot of time. I think this one is pretty well known at this point. The way that showing or hiding objects works is there's an automation button, and you can specify sort of through a GUI interface or through calculation what conditions need to be met in order to show a particular object. And then the jumping to page works similarly, only at the moment is not leveraging the calculation engine. What I'm doing there is just based on the value of the category, I'm jumping to pages that are listed out here. The reason I did want to talk or raise this though is I've seen some really incredible complexity, Juris can attest to, of you've got lots of pages that you want to jump to and route to. Being able to do this via calculation and be able to do this more visually is something that we're very interested in. We've got a couple of great examples, but if anyone else in this room is looking to do this kind of thing and have more examples, that's super valuable to us. We explored early on some different ways of visualizing this so that it's not just a string and you can start drawing lines between stuff, and we ran into some challenges. So having more use cases is super helpful here as we identify better ways of going about this. But functionally it works, but I think there's room for us to improve usability. Pre-processing with the data. So when I capture the data on the form that you saw, again, remember, depending on the category, we were then jumping to a page and we had additional fields that we were asking for. I didn't want to do a direct line between the Studio capture to my FileMaker side, because what that would have meant is that I would have had to have columns or fields for all of those different permutations, which meant most of my records would have had blank values, which means that my end user's experience of a layout meant that I would have had to show or hide objects and do a bunch of complexity that I wanted to avoid. So I put this connect flow together. And there's just a couple of things that I want to call out here. So first thing, if you haven't worked with Studio and Connect, one tripping point that you may run into is making sure date formats work. So FileMaker and Studio handle dates a little bit differently. Studio has a timestamp that it captures it as, and you'll actually, if you look at the raw value, as an ID that's not super human readable. And of course, FileMaker expects in our typical FileMaker date format. So I'm using the action here to format that date appropriately so it saves back to Studio, to FileMaker. The second part of what I'm doing here is basically a bunch of if statements. So I'm capturing whether or which type of category was selected, and then I'm building a variable or creating a variable where I'm building out displaying each of those different fields. So I'm collecting all of that record data or all those field values into a value, into a variable. Oh, a little faster than I wanted. Let's go back. It wouldn't be a presentation if the clicker didn't fail me. All right, let's try this again. All right, so now the second part of this is I've actually got two tables. I've got a client table and a jobs table. And I want to check actually when someone submits a new request if they're already a customer for me instead of every time capturing that information over and over again. In this particular case, I was checking based off of the phone number. You could do email address. You could do lots of different things that determine whether the customer is already a client. And then if they are, oh, I'm just calling out that I've got two tables here. If they are, we will then either grab their primary key so that I can save that back into the job tables as a foreign key and relate to that client. If they're not, then we go in and obviously create a new record. And then the final piece is taking all of this data and writing it back. So in the case of the client, I'm really just getting, if they already exist, I'm getting their primary key. If they don't exist, I create the record first, grab the new primary key, and then when I create my jobs table, that's what I do to create my relationship between the two. And then the end result is for the end user, for the worker, that data that was collected across those different fields, depending on which category they're in, we then just focus that into an additional details. So they have that information, but we've streamlined it for them. The confirmation page. I think this is another thing that's easy, but probably not intuitive. So when you create a text object, there's actually a calculation option that you can specify. And then what I'm doing here is I'm pointing at the jobs table, the value for the company name, well, the value for the company name. The reason this is probably not super intuitive is you may expect, well, first off is whether you find the calculation option for text. That is one of the functions that show up in the text bar. But assuming you get to that point, it's then how do I get access to the data from previously submitted pages? Studio, for a form, each page is its own view effectively. So if you tried to use the get the information from the views object, you would get a blank value because it's only looking at that current page that you're on. And because in this case I want to be able to see many pages worth of data and consolidate that, I'm actually using the data table. And it's the way that Studio is set up, even though this record hasn't been submitted, in this context there's sort of a, I don't want to say an imaginary table, but there's sort of an imaginary record table that's created here that we can call back to. Once you understand this though, it's really easy. We can go in and create as many of these as we want. So for example here we're adding, we already had name, preferred email, all that stuff. We're adding company. One other fun thing that people may not realize is you can use the built-in emoji library in the OS to add that directly to Studio views. And then now when I publish this and fill out a bit of information, I won't make you watch me do the whole thing. Capturing the company name there. And now on our page, you can see that that comes over. So I've gotten requests about this quite a bit. This is another thing that I could see us doing some sort of abstraction to make this easier and actually have a page type that is summary. But did want you to understand that this capability is available.
Will these sorts of things be in your engineering?
Yes. So everything, the plan is everything that I'm showing here, including the custom view stuff that will be coming in the coming weeks, would be to have not only engineering blog posts that we're going to start with, but we're also working on some video content that would go along with it. Sorry, the question was, is this stuff going to be covered in our blog post? And everything here that I'm showing will have detailed information on. The question?
I think on the next page it says that emails being sent to the customer and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Is Studio sending the email, and what control do you have over the format of that email?
So the question was, on the next page we have an email is being sent automatically. In this case, when I built it, I actually used Connect to send the email, which gives you pretty rich capabilities. You could also do it from FileMaker, so you could have a Connect trigger after this in that flow that I just had that triggers a FileMaker script that runs the send email. There's lots of different options there.
Studio can't send emails.
At the moment, Studio is not sending emails automatically. It is a request that we get, and it's on our backlog, but not implemented yet. Okay, so everything that I just showed is stuff that's in market. Again, we'll be rolling out blog posts for sort of each section of that, but these are things that you can start going home, playing with Studio today, and start taking advantage of. These next couple of slides are things that I feel like as you get your hands on custom view are going to be important for you to understand as sort of just as a baseline. The first is data binding. So I've created a new view and I've removed the status toolbar so we can start fresh. So a status toolbar is referred to as a data control. This is what actually allows the user to navigate between records. And then it's used to tell objects on the view what it has access, or what record to display. So in this case, you can see my description field is pointed at the status toolbar. So what that means is when a user navigates between the records, it's telling the description field, you should be on record 1, 2, 3, and show the appropriate data. I added a second description field because I want to show you that you can actually do this same functionality yourself via calculation. So we give you the sort of built-in way of using a data control, or you can go in and specify, hey, for this record ID, or sorry, for this object, I want to get its record ID from, again, the custom view is the name of the view, the object is the status toolbar, the property of the selected item, and then the record ID. In this case, it's going to perform, you'll see here in a moment, exactly the same way. So if we go in here to view the page, as I scroll through the records, you'll see that they update immediately. But the main takeaway here is that by default, you can just create a data control, drag those objects in, and it'll automatically work for you. But you do have the full access to the calculation engine. The second thing I want to show here is how related data works. So I have a related field here that's showing tasks for this particular job. And I've dragged out a spreadsheet. It is also now pointing, getting its record information from that status toolbar. But I can now hang additional fields off of that spreadsheet. So for example, we'll drag out the notes field. In this case, the notes field shows up in the column and in this extra field that I added. But you can imagine if you're creating custom interfaces, you may just want them to be able to select records and then show properties or details as part of fields. So I'm on my first record. I see my first 3 related fields. Click on one, it shows me in the notes. I go to the next record. As I click on records, it shows me updated on the notes. So this allows you really high levels of flexibility on assembling your view, where you can have different data controls pulling from different data sources and show information to your users. And then for related data, again, we try to do this as much as we can sort of out of the box easy, so that when you drag in a related data field, you have your record data there immediately. But because, like I showed, the ability to go in and drill into the where it's getting its record from via calculation, you've got the full calculation engine ahead of you. You can do all kinds of fun things. So flexibility is key here. And then rounding us out here is the data filter. We've got 2 things here. So for the hub, I've gone into, this is where we can share. I mentioned earlier that we introduced groups. This is in market now as well. And then in the next release that we'll be doing is you'll be able to select the group and then go in and configure data filters. We sort of touched on this earlier, but what this is allowing me to do is for, in this case, the jobs table, I'm matching off of a field called client email. Now we pre-filter this dropdown. So if I had a number field in there that was storing the ID as an example, that would show up. So instead of you having to go through and look for through all of your fields to find the one that you want, we filter it to ones that could possibly have the answer. And in this case, it just found one. But what this is really doing is mapping to, here you can see my data table on the left, and it's matching that email value from my field to the logged in user. Trying to make this as simple as possible, and again, solve sort of the most common up the middle cases. Cool. So we've got, I'd say probably about 8 or 9 minutes to answer any specific questions. I know we were doing it as we went, but anything else I can answer?
I'll start with one I have to, but what's the vision for, can we view like PDFs or use containers? Like, how does that work in Studio?
Yeah, the question was, can we view PDFs and interact with containers? Let me answer two parts of that question. So Studio today has an attachment field type, and in that you can place really any field type, PDFs, images, videos. PDFs are something that you can view directly in the attachment, so you can actually scroll through it, and then you also have the option to download it. That's actually configurable as well, so you can make it so that it's read-only, or that they have the ability to add and remove from it. So if it's read-only, they can go in and actually scroll through it, but not be able to do other things with it. And then how it relates to container data specifically. So if you're trying to move data between a Studio attachment field and a FileMaker container field. Right now, the shadow table approach doesn't support container fields being mapped, but we do have capabilities through Connect. So there's Studio and FileMaker connectors for exchanging record data. The release that happened about a month ago, if I'm remembering correctly, makes that a lot easier for uploading images and files. And then the data sources, that'll be something that's built in. One of the nuances that we'll have to work through are things like remote containers and how that all that stuff is handled. And there's a bunch of properties on containers that may not be supported day one, but the idea again is, as I said, not have to think too much about your data, and that extends to record data or attachments.
Have you thought about allowing people to write custom functions in JavaScript and add them to the functionality?
Yeah, the question was thinking about the ability for people to write custom JavaScript and add to the functionality. I'll answer that as well with sort of two layers. One of the reasons, again, we went with the function language that we went with is it's very close to JavaScript. And so while we're not at a point yet, we're opening it up and anyone can write any JavaScript. That was always part of our vision. Okay. The second part to it, though, is even beyond that. Right now, we are creating all of the objects. We are creating all the view types. The place where we want to get to is where we open this up and anyone can create their own objects and embed those and have them be part of the toolkit that you have within Studio. That's also going to be especially important as some of the AI stuff that you guys saw over the last couple of days of making sure that AI has the capabilities to create those things. And what really excites me about that, like we've always had the vision of being able to have the community be able to build their own objects and build their own views. But now with AI, it makes it so that not only can everyone, is it possible for everyone, but it starts lowering that bar of how many people can create what kinds of things. So that is absolutely how we think about the future of Studio. It's just not there yet.
So if I take a spreadsheet view and I want that as a JSON object to feed to JavaScript to do something complicated with it, do a pivot table or something, give it back. Will eventually people be able to build that on?
Yeah, so the question was whether you can grab the JSON of the record as an example and then process that with JavaScript and create a pivot table or create some other custom UI and bring it back in. The eventual plan is to have that full round table available. And again, you see pieces of it. When I requested that record, it returned as JSON again to make it easy to transport to other languages or other platforms to do that kind of processing. So we just haven't completed the full story yet. But I love where you're going.
JSON is text strings at the moment. It's not parsed or anything like that.
It is a valid JSON object, if I followed that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I could actually send the JSON object, not just a string.
Right.
Okay.
That's another.
I have a question about the data synchronization with FileMaker. In the third case, you say that the process starts in Studio. Will it work also with the existing solutions, or I need to create one from scratch?
Yeah. So the question was about the data sources and whether, because I called out that it starts in Studio, do we need to will it work with existing solutions or just new solutions? So the call out of it being starting with Studio is really just an entry point in your development, not that the solution itself needs to start in Studio. What I mean by that is you're in Studio, you're doing some development, you're creating some custom views. Instead of having to go into FileMaker, do some work to get access to the data, just within Studio, you can say, hey, I want to add a new data source. But the actual data source, that could be a file that you've had for however long that you've built that file, or you're creating a new file. All that we care about is that it's hosted by a supported version of server, so it's going to be the latest version of server, or cloud. So if it meets those requirements, then we should be able to reach into that file just fine.
Is there actually, I'm sorry, I totally jumped in. If there's someone else.
I'll come back to you.
Yeah,
You're very
please,
nice,
yeah,
thank
no,
you.
absolutely.
Good.
A long time ago, Peter was talking about the future, and this may be off topic, but is the fundamental structure of Studio kind of more Mongo-based and sort of a different approach to managing data, and hence a lot of the things we're going to have to get used to dealing with are kind of different kind of ways of thinking about going after data than we may be used to?
So the question was, we had talked about the infrastructure of Studio being built fundamentally different, being built on top of Mongo, which is true. The way that the data is stored is Mongo. We are layering on, Mongo is by its nature unstructured. We're layering some structured piece because we're coming from the FileMaker world. The eventual goal, though, is that sets us up to be able to handle other data sources and store data in different ways. The point about how much you have to think about that, though, is hopefully limited. You shouldn't have to worry about the fact that it's Mongo behind the scenes. But we could be, the plan is to get to a place where we can surface the values of Mongo.
So context, really. It's just understanding that instead you're using a web language where the interface and the data are not actually directly linked. That's I think, the main mind shift.
Yeah. I can do like one or two more, and I saw two hands, so this is going to be the last two, and then I'll come back to you.
So with the new Studio connector directly to the FileMaker tables, how you handle record locking?
It's a good question. So FileMaker will always be the winner there, as far as if for some reason the record's locked and Studio can't write back. The data won't be lost, it'll still exist in Studio, but FileMaker will hold that record. The full details of that, though, we've got figuring out to do. And that's why if you're interested in helping us test in a moment, actually maybe I put it up. I'll come back to your question, but just so I can get this out of the way. Real quick summary here. Studio is about extending internal solutions. We've got powerful collection forms, and custom views are coming soon. But I want to put this up so people can take screenshots. This is signing up for our external testing program. This gets into, we'll have the data syncing capabilities up in the coming weeks, maybe a month or so, and that'll really be where we're fine-tuning questions like that. Okay, while people are taking screenshots, let's come back to your question.
So one was the version. So is basically the interaction between current Studio, how far back does it go in terms of versioning? Do you have to be running FMS 24, or does it go back in previous versions?
So we don't block anything. It doesn't need to be in 24. At the moment, it's still 23. There's nothing, we try not to block artificially, so it won't be until there's a reason to. So some of the data sources stuff, there's advancements that we're making to server and cloud, and at that point, that feature may require that version. But right now, I know at least back to 23 has no issue.
Cool.
Okay. So I hope everyone got a screenshot of this. I encourage you to sign up. There's a few members of the ETS in this room. Hopefully they can vouch for it. It's a good time. It's a good community. We meet every Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific, and we have a good time. So hope to see you guys there. Rounding out, if you've got additional questions, I will be at the Claris booth from 10:30 to 12. So please join me. Happy to have larger discussions. And then don't forget to rate the session. Hopefully you enjoyed it all. Thank you all.
Thank you.